Hello and welcome to Fast Horses Today. Today we are going to be going over the Belmont Stakes, which is on Saturday, June 7th. And they are running the Belmont Stakes again at Saratoga. So the distance of the race is a 1.25 miles, grade 1, $2 million purse. And we've got a nice competitive, very, very competitive field, of stars in this 8-horse field for the Belmont Stakes. So Belmont Stakes has approximate post time about 6 o'clock here Central Time, so that's 4 o'clock there in the Pacific Time Zone, and it's the 13th race on the card at Saratoga. So let's get started and talk about the Belmont Stakes this year. So as I mentioned, they got a nice field signed on for this. The folks there carding the stakes, are very fortunate to have the Derby winner in Sovereignty, the Preakness winner in Journalism, and a fast closing finisher in the Kentucky Derby being Baeza. So those are the 3 horses that everyone will probably be having their eyes on. But, there's certainly some other horses that have some really nice value there. Can definitely have an effect on the outcome of this race. So we'll get started here with the one horse. The one horse is Hill Road for Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz. And, this horse takes an interesting route to running in the American Dirt Classics. This horse originally started his career in Ireland, running at, the big tracks there in Ireland, being Leopardstown and the Curragh. And, they brought this horse over from Ireland. Usually, horses like this, they run them on grass. But, Chad Brown saw this horse having, dirt ability and, maybe a dirt future. So, he ended up running this horse in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which is, always a great race. They ran it at Del Mar last year. This horse ended up finishing third that day, finishing third to Citizen Bull and Gaming. And it was going to be very tough to beat Citizen Bull that day at that time of his career. That horse was just very fast, would get out to the lead, and nobody was catching him. So I thought Hill Road ran a really nice race to come third there, in his first start in North America in a tough spot. He followed that up with 2 races this year. He ran in the Tampa Bay Derby, which he, again, came third there in that race. And, it looked to me like it was a nice effort there in coming third. He probably needed the race, it seemed to me. But, looked like he showed a lot there. He followed that up with a big race in the Peter Pan. And, what I like about the Peter Pan, in this running is it was run over at Aqueduct. And, it's a 2-turn race. It's 1.125 miles. And I feel like that's the kind of race will translate well to Saratoga, at 1.25 miles, where the Belmont is run this year. So, he ended up winning that race. And I thought he ran a really nice race. Didn't get out to the best of starts. And, just sat back. Flavian Pratt, just a master, as he always is, sat the horse patient. And the horse really made up a lot of ground and running by the 2 other finishers there, which, I thought that it was kind of an eye-popping move, in my opinion, because those 2 horses really weren't stopping, and he just went and got them. So 10-1, he's got Irad Ortiz on him in the Belmont, and I do feel like Hill Road has a great chance to hit the board, and he'll be a play in my exotic. So I do like Hill Road to hit the board in this race. And as I mentioned, I'll have him in my plays, which we'll talk about momentarily. All right, now let's move over to the 2-horse. 2-horse being Sovereignty. Sovereignty, the Derby winner, Belmont, trains for Godolphin, Junior Alvarado. If you had watched my Kentucky Derby preview on Fast Horses Today, you heard how much I like this horse, and I did play this horse. He was very kind. Ended up running and paying us off that day, so that was wonderful. At about 8-1, and I just recognized something today. I didn't know this about this horse. I watched a different angle of the Kentucky Derby replay, and I didn't know this. The horse got shut off pretty good several steps out of the gate and ended up stumbling and in a pretty significant stumble. I didn't see that in the first running. I didn't see that in a couple replays watching the NBC feed, but I saw a different feed this morning and saw that. I said, wow, I didn't realize he had that much trouble after the start of the race. A lot of times a horse will just pack it in, or, it was a significant stumble. If you get a chance, you could watch the track feed. You'll see what I'm talking about. That makes me like this horse even more than I already like this horse. I feel like Sovereignty is just a special horse. You don't have to be an undefeated horse and a 7-for-7 or 8-for-8 to be special. You could be special in how you run your races, and I think that's what he's done so far. He ran a wonderful race in the Kentucky Derby. I feel like he had more to give if needed. There's been, talk about there that, maybe Journalism, could have beaten him, or Baeza, if he had a little better luck, could have beaten him. I just don't see it that way. I think that Sovereignty did everything he needed to do. I think Alvarado did everything he needed to do going by journalism, and Baeza was not going to get past him if he needed to get into the horse a little more. So I'm going to go again with Sovereignty here. I'm going to make a win bet on Sovereignty. He's 2-1 in the program. I feel like you're going to probably get around 2-1 on this horse. I think that, people will be betting the other horses. Journalism will certainly get his share of action and certainly warranted, and so will Baeza. So I feel like you'll get around 2-1 on Sovereignty, and I feel like it's a great price for a horse of his caliber, of his stature, of his ability. So Sovereignty is going to be my pick for the Belmont Stakes this year. I am going to put him on top, and we'll talk about the bets in a little bit. Let's go to the 3-horse Rodriguez. Rodriguez trained by Bob Baffert, Mike Smith on the call. Now, Rodriguez was scheduled to run in the Derby, ended up getting scratched out of that race. He was projected to probably be speed or one of the speeds of the race. I'm pretty familiar with Rodriguez since he had been running in Southern California. And, I'm a Southern California handicapper, for the most part. So I get very familiar with these horses. Rodriguez had run some nice races. I didn't feel I felt he was a cut below the other horses there in California. Journalism being the top horse, and then a couple of the other Baffert horses I think were better than Rodriguez. But Baffert made a pretty shrewd move in sending this horse over to the Wood Memorial, putting Mike Smith on the horse. The horse had one way to go, which was to the top. Ended up wiring the field there in the Wood Memorial. And Mike Smith, was kind of a homecoming for him. I know Smith had ridden a lot of races in the NYRA circuit, won a lot of races there, probably had won a lot of races over at Aqueduct, so was familiar there. Ended up getting the job done. So Rodriguez is 6-1 in the Belmont Stakes. I know there's talk, handicappers saying this might be the lone speed in the race and that he might steal it. I just don't see it that way. I think there's other speed in it. And Rodriguez certainly will be up close, but I don't think that he'll finish up. And I don't even see him in the top 3, so we'll go take a pass on him. The 4-horse Uncaged for Todd Pletcher. Pletcher's got a few horses in this race, and Uncaged is 30-1. It's interesting. You get horses like this. This is a $450,000 purchase, which probably and he's shown some nice ability, but it'll go up against these horses, and I feel like he just doesn't have a chance. So we'll throw out the 4. The 5-horse Crudo, another Todd Pletcher horse. Crudo, another nice-looking horse, big purchase price. Ended up wiring the field in the Sir Barton on Preakness on the undercard there. I think this horse, he ran certainly a nice race, and I feel like this horse, will probably get out and run with Rodriguez. I don't see why he couldn't. He put up some really fast fractions last time at Pimlico where, those fractions were, pretty fast there. They don't usually run like that. So Crudo certainly looks like he's got one way to go. Probably be a factor there for the first half mile, maybe 5/8, and I just don't know that, he'll be finishing up strongly. So I'm going to throw out Crudo. That would be the 5-horse. The 6-horse. 6-horse is Baeza for John Sheriff, Flavian Pratt. He's Pratt, master, as I said. I thought Pratt gave this horse a wonderful ride in the Derby. Ended up coming third that day, finishing, not too far away from Journalism Baeza. Probably a little more luck. He might have come second, might have beaten Journalism out for second. But, as I mentioned, moments ago, I don't think this horse was going to get to Sovereignty. Baeza is certainly a really nice horse. I think, the distance is perfect. It's as long as you want to give him, he'll run it. Being by that man, by the mom Puka. Puka certainly, was a great producer in producing a Belmont winner and a Preakness Derby winner in previous years. So Baeza certainly has the pedigree. He's shown some nice races. I think that he was probably kind of a victim of getting started a little too late, which, I think that's a John Sheriff's kind of tendency there, where he got started a little bit too late there. Came second in the Santa Anita Derby, needed a couple horses to scratch out to qualify to even get in the Derby, which happened. Ran a nice race. I'm not going to speak poorly about this horse. He's certainly nice, but I just don't know that he'll beat Sovereignty. So, Baeza, you could put him underneath, second, third, certainly can't argue with that, but, I'm not going to select him to win, though. Let's go with the 7-horse here. 7-horse being Journalism, Michael McCarthy, Umberto Rispoli. We all saw the wonderful effort that he put up in the Preakness, overcoming, some trouble that, frankly, I feel he caused, but, that's a different discussion. Stewards didn't see it that way. He kept the win, which was fine. Now, Journalism, Very familiar with this horse. This is another Southern California horse. And that's where I do most of my work there. Saw this horse in his first race. I said, wow, this horse really is going to like distance. He didn't want to sprint that day. When they put this horse 2 turns, he delivered, in glowing fashion by winning several graded stakes races. Ended up winning the Santa Anita Derby, ran a huge race in the Kentucky Derby, and then ultimately won the Preakness. So this horse has really done it all. I feel like, maybe he was just in the wrong year. I think Sovereignty's just a little better than him. But Journalism is certainly a wonderful horse, and, it's certainly a kind of horse you root for. Rispoli has given this horse some tough rides, I feel, in my opinion, has given this horse a lot to do, and the horse just, kind of pulled him through it and got it done. So certainly a really, really nice horse. I root for the connections as well, Eclipse Thoroughbred Partners. I think these folks do a nice job and the purchasing of horses, the managing of horses, and placement of horses. So I think they do a really nice job, with the folks over at Eclipse, so I root for them. They run a lot in Southern California, and normally, Journalism would be a horse I would select, but I'm a Sovereignty guy, and, Sovereignty's proven, and I think he'll prove it again. But, Journalism certainly can hit the board, and get there in the money second or third. So no knock on journalism at all. It's just that I'm going to make a choice, and I'm going to make a choice to Sovereignty. The 8 horse rounds out the field, this being Heart of Honor. Jamie Osborne and his daughter, Safi Osborne. Now they teamed up and ran in the Preakness. They had kind of a rough start there. The horse ran okay. The question mark was, how is this horse going to run, coming off the boat, having done all of his, or most of his running in the Dubai Maidan racetrack. And, I thought the horse ran okay. I don't know if this horse is as good as the other horses. I do think that a horse like Sovereignty, Journalism, and then even maybe Baez are just cuts above, the other 3-year-olds. So Heart of Honor, 30-1, maybe in your superfecta, I don't know, but I'm not going to select this horse in the top 3. All right, now let's recap the picks for the Belmont Stakes and the bets. Okay, so for the 2025 Belmont Stakes, we've got a couple bets here that we're going to make. First of all, I'm going to go with a trifecta. Dollar trifecta. Going to go Sovereignty, the 2-horse. 2 with Hill Road. That's the 1 with all. That's a $6 play. Then we're going to go Sovereignty with all with the 1 Hill Road. That's another $6 play. And then also we're going to make another trifecta key. 2 with the 1, 6, 7. So that's Sovereignty on top of Hill Road and Baeza and Journalism. That's another $6 play. And then I do have the win bet on Sovereignty. Now, later this week, I'll be handicapping the rest of the Saratoga card that day, and I'm going to single Sovereignty in my pick 5. We'll see if we can come up with a nice pick 5 there for you. We'll have that in a couple days. But that does it for today for the Belmont Stakes. Going to play Sovereignty. Love this horse. I think he's special, and I think he'll show us again why he's special. So as always, you can play the picks as is. You can add or subtract, and make alterations as you see fit. I wish you the best of luck in the Belmont Stakes. Let's wish the folks over at Saratoga a very safe weekend of racing, which does start on Wednesday. So safe racing to them all week. Like, dislike, you can make comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. It's just, it gives you the free feed to you when new content gets created like this. It gets served up to you directly. Doesn't cost you anything to do so. You can, make comments. I promise to respond to everything. Let's create a discussion. And best of luck in the Belmont Stakes for 2025 at Saratoga. Thank you for watching.